We are on Daf Nun Beis Amid Aleph by the two dots. The Mishnah says that one of the treifas is if the ribs are broken. So the question is, how many ribs have to break to make the animal a treifa? So Tan Rabbanon Elohev Roiv Tzalois. So the Gemara understands is that there's 22 ribs that have marrow. There's actually more than 22 ribs, but there's 22 main ribs. So says the Gemara Elohev Roiv Tzalois. In order for the animal to be a treifa, you need roiv of the 22, i.e. you need 12. So it could be sheish mekan v'sheish mekan, 6 on one side, 6 on the other. Or it could be 11 on one side, 1 on the other. In other words, any combination of 12 ribs that are broken makes a treifa. Says the Gemara, Amar Ziri umechtzin klape shedra. It's only if the break is towards the back, not towards the belly, right? The ribs are half circles, right? It has to be where it's broken towards the top half of the animal as opposed to on the bottom half of the animal. Then the Gemara clarifies, I told you before there are 22 ribs. And then the majority makes a treifa. The truth is there's more than 22 ribs, but the Gemara clarifies. It's talking about the 22 ribs that have marrow. So there might be more than 22 ribs, but there's 22 ribs that have marrow, and therefore the majority of the 22 ribs makes a treifa. So 12 out of 22. Fine. Now, here's where we're going to have a discussion, and this is going to take us to the end of the Amid. A very interesting discussion, and that is, we talked about breaking. So it's very clear that for the animal to be a treifa and it has broken ribs, it's 12. 12 broken ribs. The question is, what about dislocated ribs? So, just one thing to remember. You have a rib on this side, a rib on the other side, and they're held together by a piece of the vertebrae. Okay, it's the only thing you need to know. Says the Gemara, Amar Ula ben Zakkai, Omer, Ula quotes Ben Zakkai. Rashi says he doesn't know who this Ben Zakkai is. It's not Rav Yechon ben Zakkai, it's an Amora. Amar Ula ben Zakkai, Amar, Nekru beroiv tzad echad. When it comes to dislocating ribs, you don't need 12. 6 is enough. Okay, so broken it's 12, but now dislocated, we have one opinion that it's 6 ribs. If 6 ribs are dislocated, it's a treifa. Now, nishtabu beroiv shnei tzad. If it's broken, it's 12, but dislocation is 6. That's Ben Zakkai. Rav Yechon Amar, he says no. Both dislocated and broken, it's the same, it's 12. So you have a machlokes, how many ribs have to dislocate for the animal to be a treifa? Ben Zakkai says 6, Rav Yochanan says 12. Okay, so you got 6 and 12. Let's keep going. Amar Rav, nekra tzela v'chulya ima. If one rib is dislocated with its vertebrae, it's a treifa. Now, I'm going to just talk this out. Yeah, so how does that work? Now, if the vertebrae is dislocated, and the rib is dislocated, it's probably going to dislocate the other rib, right? Because they're connected, right? The vertebrae, you have the vertebrae in the middle, and you got the 2 ribs on either side. So Rav is saying if one rib and a vertebrae is dislocated, then it's already a treifa. Now, how do you have? It can't just be kipshutai, because if the entire vertebrae, that piece of the vertebrae, and the rib is dislocated, it's going to schlep the other rib on the other side. Let's say there's, I guess, a. I don't know how there could be it could be dislocated without breaking the spinal cord.
This is a spinal issue.
Yeah, more than a rib issue. If the vertebra breaks off both sides, and the one.
Yeah, I don't know how you could dislocate a piece of the vertebrae without breaking the spinal cord.
And the other one's
But you know what my answer is? Evidently you can. You can do anything you want to do. So anyway, the point is, here's the point though, I'm just going to speak this out. You have one rib dislocated with a vertebrae. Actually, talk to your dad about this. He actually might be interested. So, vertebrae and a rib and vertebrae, but just one rib, one vertebrae. So how does that work? Because they're connected. So obviously the Gemara is going to explain it's not the full vertebrae that's dislocated. Only a half of it is sort of chopped off, or it's, I don't know, part of it is dislocated. Part of it is dislocated. They're calling it dislocated, but it could be, the truth is, necro means removed, dislocated, disjointed. The point is, it's not the full vertebrae. It's one rib and a part of the vertebrae. Fine. So one rib and a part of the vertebrae is a dislocation. It's treifa. One rib. Says the Gemara, that's Rav. So we have 6, 12, and now 1. Amar Rav Kana Ravasi l'Rav. So Rav Kana Ravasi said to Rav, who just said 1 with a vertebrae's dislocation. They said to him, what if instead of 1 with a vertebrae, what if I have either a rib on either side, but the vertebrae is still intact? So I have a dislocation here, a dislocation here. but the vertebrae is still intact. That's what they asked Rav. So Rav said one rib and a vertebrae. They said, what about 2 ribs, no vertebrae? So 2 ribs are dislocated, no vertebrae. So Rav responds, instead of just saying that it's treif, he said, gister kamret. That's an animal cut in half. Meaning, that's like a nevela. Meaning, he said, that's like you split an animal in half. So it's his way of saying, it's like a super treifa. Like he was saying it's mamish like you split the animal in half with a knife. That was Rav's statement. So the Gemara just speaks it out. What did Rav originally say, and then their response? So the Gemara clarifies. Harav nami gister kamar. So one second. So why does Rav call this a gistra? A gistra means that the animal's cut in half, where it's like mamish like it's a dead animal right now. They said a rib on either side, but the vertebrae is still intact. Rav, what did Rav? We have to just clarify. What did Rav say, and then how did they respond? So the Gemara says, "Kikam Rav tzela b'lichulya." Maybe Rav felt that it's only a dislocation. Rav's original point was one rib. The only thing that's dislocated is one rib, but the vertebrae is still intact. The Gemara says that's not true. Hatzela b'chulya. That's not what he said. So the Gemara speaks out what I said before. Tzela v'chatzi chulya. This is the clarification. I sort of spoke this out before. It makes it a little easier. Rav originally said if you have one rib and a part of the vertebrae that are dislocated, it's a treifa. One rib and a part of the vertebrae. To that, Rav Asi and Rav Kahana are asking, what if both ribs are dislocated but the vertebrae is completely intact? So again, just to clarify, Rav said one rib and partial vertebrae is removed, dislocated, whatever. That's a treifa. Then they asked him, I get that. What about 2 ribs, but no vertebrae issue, just 2 rib issue? So he said that's a gistra. Here's the issue, though. Now we have to speak this out. Rav now said that if you have 2 ribs that are completely dislocated, vertebrae and fine, intact, that's a treifa. He responded to them that that's not just a treifa, a gistra, like super treifa, fine. Here's a question before. We started our discussion by having 2 opinions. We said 6 or 12. But now you're telling me it's 2? So how does that work? Let's go with the 6 opinion. Is it 6 or is it 2? So the Gemara says very simple. 6 is on one side. 2 is if they're lined up to each other. They can agree with each other. Meaning, when Rav Kahana Rav Asi asked Rav and he said 2 is a treifa, it doesn't mean he disagrees with the opinion of 6. It could work out. It could be 6 in a line, or 2 that are part of share one vertebrae. That's easy. The problem is the 12 opinion. Rav Yochanan says it's 12, which means it's 6 on either side. If there's only 12 on either side and 6 and 6, you're going to have 2 that are together just by math, right? Let's say there's 12 on this side, 12 on that side, and he says that if there are 12, that's considered a treifa. So you start counting from over there, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and I count on the other side, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The middle one is going to be aligned. So what we have a shtickle problem over here is that Rav Yochanan said that in order for it to be a treifa, you need 12 ribs dislocated, but now Rav is saying all you need is 2. How do we make those jive? Assuming for some reason the Gemara wants to make them jive together instead of just making it a machlokas.
That doesn't matter. You have 6 on one side, it's only 6. 6 on the other side, it's only 12. They don't.
They do, because if there's only 12 on either side.
Yeah. You have 6 on one side and 6 on the other side.
We'll get to it in a second, okay? Just give me a minute. I will figure this out in the next 10 seconds. Says the Gemara, Michlader of Kahana Rav Asi Tzela B'Leichulya Amri. That means that Rav Kahana and Rav Asi are asking about 2 ribs that are dislocated without anything affecting the vertebrae. And Rav said that's a treifa. But wait a minute. Hamar Ula ben Zakkai. Didn't Ula say in the name ben Zakkai that it's neku b'roiv tzarech and nesha b'roiv shnei tzadim, that 6 makes a dislocation treifa, not 2? So the Gemara says, Amar Lach, Hasam Zek Shalai Keneged Zeh. Hacha Zek Keneged Zeh. That's not a problem. It could be 6 if they're not lined up, or 2 that are sharing one vertebrae. Fine. But says the Gemara, Hamar Rav Yochanan b'roiv shnei tzadim. But didn't Rav Yochanan say that in order to be a treifa, it's 12 dislocations, u'b'roiv shnei tzadim, and if you have 12, it's impossible that you will only... Oh, there's only 11 ribs on either side. My bad. There's only 11 ribs on either side. I thought there was 12. 11 ribs, 22, 12 is the riv. I got confused with the numbers. So there's 11 on either side. So then if you say that 12 have to be dislocated, by definition, they're going to be sharing 2 ribs on one vertebrae. That's the problem. So how could Rav Yochanan say... This is going to... It's actually it's like whittling the problem down. Rav Yochanan said 12, but now Rav is saying... answering Rav Kahana Rav Asi that it's 2. So which one is it? So the Gemara says, here's the answer. It's 12 if there's no issue with the vertebrae at all. It's 2 if there's a partial break of the vertebrae. But wait a minute. Fine. Now we have the original problem. Now think about the conversation. Rav started off this conversation by saying, if you have one rib with a partial break of the vertebrae, that's a treifa. They then asked him, what about 2? We thought it was originally 2 ribs without any problems with the vertebrae, but now we've explained it to make it work with Rav Yochanan. We've now explained it that Rav Kahana and Rav Asi are asking about 2 with a broken vertebrae. So in other words, Rav started off this discussion by saying, if you have one rib with a partial break of the vertebrae, that's a treifa. To which they asked him, what about 2 ribs with a partial break of the vertebrae? And he says, that's a mega treifa. That's a mega pint, right? That's a mega treifa. So the question is, why are they asking Rav? If Rav just said that one rib with a partial vertebrae issue is a treifa, then why are you asking him 2? That's the problem. So it says the Gemara, let's see it inside. So the Gemara says, Hasam buchna b'loy asisa. Rav Yochanan's case where it's 12 is the pestle is broken without the mortar. In other words, the ribs are dislocated, but the vertebrae, the thing that holds the ribs, is perfectly fine. That's when you need 12. Hacha buchna v'asisa. Rav Kahana Rav Asi's case where it's 2 is where there's a partial break, dislocation, or something. There's an issue with the vertebrae. So that's why it's 2. But here's the problem. Wasn't that Rav's opinion? Rav said one rib and a vertebrae issue is a treif, and now they asked him, what about 2 ribs and a vertebrae issue? That's a strange thing to do. The answer is loy shmiya le Rav. The answer is they did not hear Rav's opinion. Meaning, the way the information is laid out, it makes it sound like Rav said his opinion, and then they asked him that question. That's not true. They did not know Rav's opinion. So they're just coming in blind. So Rav started off the conversation when they're not in the room, and he said, one rib and a partial vertebrae problem is a treifa. They come into the room blind. They have no information. And they ask, what about 2 ribs and a partial vertebrae? And he said it's a gistra. Now, let me ask you one question. If they don't have any information, why are they jumping to 2? Right? They don't know anything. Rav happened to say that 1 is a treifa, but they don't know that. They walk into the room blind and they have a shayla, they're able to ask Rav a question. And they just start off, what about 2 ribs and a vertebrae problem? And he says, it's a gisra. Why not start off with 1 rib? Yeah, the Gemara feels that if you want to get information out, ask 1, and then you'll be able to figure out 2. So the Gemara says, well, the answer is, it depends. The Gemara is saying like this, ask 1, you'll figure out 2. Well, it depends. What is the answer? If he says 1 is treif, then kal v'chomer 2 is treif. But if he says 1 is kosher, they may not be able to then figure out what is 2. That's why they asked 2, because if they asked 1, they wouldn't necessarily know what 2 is. True. We'll get to that in a second. So it says the Gemara, Savri, they thought to themselves, I'm going to ask one question that's going to give me all the information. They wanted to figure out 1 and 2. 1 rib with a partial vertebrae problem, 2 ribs with partial vertebrae problem. And they have one question to ask Rav because they don't want to bother Rav. So they said to themselves, let's ask one question which is going to give us all the information. If we ask 1, it's not going to give us all the information. Why? Because if we ask 1 and he says it's treif, then they're able to figure out 2. But if they ask him, what about 1 rib with a vertebrae problem, and he says that's kosher, then they don't know what the halach is by 2, because maybe 2 is also kosher, or maybe 2 is treif. So says the Gemara, if they ask only about 1 rib, then they're not necessarily going to get the proper answer for 2. Why? Yes, if you ask what about 1 rib with a partial dislocation of the vertebrae, and he says it's treif, then kol shekain tarti, then kal v'chomer 2 ribs. But if they thought to themselves, if we ask about 1 and he says it's kosher, akati mibar le tarti, we don't know about 2, so we don't want to ask that question. So Adam asked a very good point. You're still back to the same problem. You're trying to ask one question will get you all the information. So he didn't want to ask 1. I get it, because it's not going to get you all the information because it depends on what he answers. So what did they ask? 2. Does that give all the information? Not necessarily. Why? Because if you ask 2 with a partial vertebrae dislocation, and he says kosher, kal v'chomer 1 is kosher. But if he says treif, I don't know what about 1. So it's still the same problem. So it says the Gemara, ihachi hashanami dekabai minei tarti hanicha amar lekshera koshke chada yomlu treifa kati chadim baile. So the Gemara answers that's not true. Here's the cheshbon. We're going to walk into the room. We're going to ask Rab the following question. We're going to ask him 2 ribs with a partial dislocation of the vertebrae, and they felt to go all the information. I'll tell you why. Here's the options. If he says kosher, Kavachomer, one rib is kosher, for sure. But then they thought like this: if he says treif, we'll be able to tell what about one. Why? Because it depends how he answers. Is he angry? Because if they ask, is 2 ribs of the partial vertebrae treif? And he's like, treif, like, of course. Then they know that what he means to say is, 1 rib is treif. You ask me about 2. But if he says, treif, then, So they were able to figure out based on how he answers treif. And by the way, kachava, what did he answer? He said, gistera. Gistera means the animal's cut in half. That's his way of saying, you idiots. He's saying, of course it's treif. That's his way of saying, you ask me about 2. 1 is treif, of kavachomer 2. That's Rab's way of responding. So it says the Gemara, Savri imkein meritach karotach chada treif atarnu boy. They figured out they'll be able to get the answer because they'll say, is he angry when he answers the question? So it says the Gemara, hakarmi b'loy ratach, but he wasn't angry. And the answer is, yeah, he was. How do you see that he was angry when he said gistra? The answer is, kivan dekarmelu gistra karmi tainu ritche. The fact that he didn't respond treifa, he said it's a gistera, that was his way of saying, why are you asking me about 2? 1 is a treif, kavachomer 2. That was his way of responding. I know. Shows you personality of Rabban and Rav was that's interesting. So we have so far multiple opinions. We have for dislocations, we got 1 rib with a partial vertebrae, we got 2 ribs with partial vertebrae, we got no vertebrae issues but just ribs 6 and 12. So 6, 12, and with vertebrae issues. Comes the Gemara, now you have Shmuel, who just says, just 1. No, just 1. No vertebrae problem, just 1 rib dislocated, that's a treifa. Says the Gemara, Amar Rabba Bar Shila, Amar Rav Masna, Amar Shmuel. Shmuel, by the way, this is not a problem. Shmuel can argue with everybody. Right? None of these people are Tanoim. He could argue with everybody. Says Shmuel, I'll tell you the following 3 things that are treifa. Nekrat Selam Eikara, 1 rib dislocated, it's a treifa. Number 2, Gulgala Shenechbes Beruba. If the skull is crushed in the majority of the skull, that's also a treifa. And Basar HaChayfes Roiv HaKeres Beruboy. If there's a problem with most of the belly, the flesh of the belly, not the stomach line, the belly that covers the keres, so that skin that covers the stomach, if there's an issue with the majority of the skin, we'll see, does that mean it's removed? Does that mean it's cut? We'll get to that in a second. Those 3 are all treifas. Now let's go through each one. Says the Gemara Necker, Tzelem Eikara. If one of the ribs is dislocated enough, that's a treifa. Go to the next page. Whoo! I think that was mostly the hard part. The rest is it gets easier. Says the Gemara, here's the problem. Or many have a contradiction. The contradiction is as follows. When it comes to a dead body, we know that a dead body gives off tumah. If the majority of the spinal, what do you call it? Not just spinal cord with the head, whatever you call that, bone structure is intact. Yeah. So it says the Gemara, but if the spinal cord is missing bones, then the body no longer gives off tumas oil. Obviously, it gives off tumah if you touch it, but oil, you need the spinal cord to be intact. How many vertebrae have to be missing to make it no longer tumas oil? So Beis Shammai says shtei chulias, 2 vertebrae. Beis Hillel omer chulia achas, 1 vertebrae. One vertebrae. So here's the question. And Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, and Shmuel himself said Chen l'treifa. So the question is, Shmuel is saying that when it comes to treifa, if it's missing a vertebrae, it's a treifa. But you just told me that if it's missing a rib, so which one is it? Is it a rib or is it a vertebrae? And the answer is they're both true. If it's missing a rib, meaning dislocated rib, but the vertebrae is intact, that's a treifa. Dislocated vertebrae, but the rib is intact, also a treifa. Now that's the thinker. How do you have a missing vertebrae? How do you have a dislocated vertebrae but the rib's intact? That we'll figure out. But the point is, the original question was, Shmuel said 1 rib is a treifa, but over here he's saying a vertebrae is a treifa. And the answer is they're both right. They're both like 2 sides of 1 coin. If you're missing a rib, but the vertebrae is intact, it's a treifa. If you're missing the vertebrae, but the ribs are intact, it's also a treifa. That says the Gemara, now the question is, how do you have a missing vertebrae, but the ribs are intact?
You can't just say that the meat and everything's really together?
No. I don't know. Evidently not. No. Because Gemara assumes that if the vertebrae is dislocated, that would definitely dislocate the ribs as well. So the Gemara is going to answer. Apparently, there's the ribs. There's the vertebrae at the very base of the spine that don't actually connect to ribs.
Okay.
Lumbar.
Yeah.
Oh.
And sacrum.
Oh, you went too far. Lumbar. So the point is, so the answer is that's where you could have a dislocated vertebrae, but no rib, because there's no ribs on that part of the body. Okay. Says the Gemara, how do you have a dislocated vertebrae but not affecting the ribs? The answer is bishili kafle, by the back of the animal, by the lumbar part. There are vertebrae, but there's no ribs. Okay. Now, the Gemara has an interesting question, and it's just how its perspective. This Mishnah started off, forget about the dislocated, all this up. Stop. The Mishnah said, how many vertebrae have to be missing for the person not to give off tumas oil? Beis Shammai says 2. Beis Hillel says 1. Who's being strict in this case? Beis Shammai, because Beis Shammai is saying that even if you're missing one vertebrae, it still gives off tumas oil. So Beis Shammai is being strict. Huh? Beis Shammai 2. Meaning, you need to... No, it's not. It's a chumrah. I'll tell you why. Oh, true, but when it comes to tumas oil, it's a chumrah. Why? Because that means you can have a body that's missing a vertebrae, and Beis Hillel is like, no more tumah. Be lenient. Beis Shammai says, no, still tumah, because you need to miss 2 to be... meaning, so according to Beis Shammai, it's a stringency. Comes Shmuel, and he says, the same halacha applies to a treifa. Now, here's the opposite. Beis Hillel is now being strict, because if you have an animal that's missing a vertebrae, one vertebrae, Beis Shammai says, you could still eat it. Beis Hillel says, you can't eat it. So what was a leniency on Beis Hillel's part by tumas oil is now a stringency by treifa. So the Gemara has a question, according to Shmuel, that the same halacha applies by oil and tumah and treifa, then why is this not one of the examples listed of Beis Shammai being lenient? And the Gemara's answer is very obvious, because from the perspective of tumas oil, it's a stringency, and that's what they were addressing. They weren't. Shmuel saying the halacha that they were addressing applies to treifa as well. And you're right, by treifa it's reverse. But the reason why it doesn't go down to the list in the Idias has a list of times where Beis Shammai is more lenient than Beis Hillel. The reason why it's not in that case is because what they were addressing, Beis Shammai was being more strict. So it says the Gemara, Maskar Ravoshia, the listening Abi Kuli Beis Shammai v'Chumra Beis Hillel. The answer is Amrle Rava ki itchel in tum itchel, because the question that was posed to Beis Shammai Beis Hillel was regarding tumah. And in that case, Beis Shammai is being more machmer. Let's keep going. If you have a skull that's crushed, Shmuel said 3 things make a treifa. 1 is missing one rib, or dislocating one rib. Number 2 is if the skull is crushed in its majority. The question is, what does that mean? The majority, the height of the skull, or the circumference? I think what it means is, I don't know fully, but I think what it means is like this. If let's say that these are the eyes, right? These are the eyes. Let's say it's just crushed like this. Not the top of the skull is fine, the bottom of the skull is fine, just a line across. Is that enough to make it a treifa, or does it have to crush the whole forehead part? That's it seems to be the shaila teku unclear. Okay, 2 more sugyas. One little sugya, and then we'll get to the last sugya of the day. This little sugya This little sugya is like this. Here's the question. Shmuel said the last opinion is that if the flesh that covers the stomach, there's something happened to it. Is it what happened to the stomach? The flesh around the stomach. What happened to it to make it a treif? So it says the Gemara, Boy Rav Ashi, Beroiv Karua or Beroiv Nutal? Is it that the stomach outside of the keres, there's flesh that covers the stomach? Not the stomach itself, then there's flesh on top of it. Something happened to it and it makes it a treifa. Is it the stomach got? Is it the stomach, the skin? I'll call it the skin. The skin of the stomach got torn. Merely torn is enough to make a treifa, or it has to be removed. Now the truth is, Shmuel never said what he meant. Borderline impossible to know what he meant because he wasn't around to ask. The Gemara has a very clever way of figuring out what it could be, but it's not according to Shmuel. That's the problem. But let me just speak out. It's very clever. We're trying to figure out this stomach, this on top of the stomach, this basar. And Shmuel said if something happens to Roiv of it, it's a problem. That can mean a tear, or no, it needs to be removed. Again, Shmuel never addressed it, but the Gemara has a very clever way of figuring out. Here's the clever way. If you remember, we had this a couple days ago. There's called the keres hapnimi, where a puncture makes a treifa, and then there's a keres achitzon. What is a keres achitzon? One opinion said the keres achitzon is the skin around the stomach. If that's true, then that's your answer. Because keres achitzon, if it's torn, roiv, it's a treifa. So if you put that together, if the keres achitzon is the basar on top, and the keres achitzon, according keres achitzon is rov torn, then that tells you rov torn as well. Maybe that's what Shmuel meant. The problem with that is that opinion is going with the presumption that a keres hapnimi, which a puncture is the stomach, and keres achitzon is the basar on top of the stomach. In which case, it works out well. That's not Shmuel's interpretation. Shmuel himself said that the keres hapnimi is one part of the stomach, and the keres achitzon is not the basar on top, but it's the part of the stomach that's not hairy on the inside. So he never addressed the basar on top of the stomach, and therefore you can't put it together because he was not the author of that statement. Okay. Says the Gemara, Tiv Shalei Miditnan, I can have an answer from the following Mishnah. It says, Keres hapnimis shenikva, if you have the keres hapnimis and a puncture, it's treifa. Oy shenikra roiv hachitzona, or the keres hachitzon if it's torn by its majority. Now, what is the keres hachitzon? There were like 7 opinions. One opinion says, Rav Yossi Bar Chanina says the keres hachitzon is kol keres kuli keres hapnimi. The entire stomach is the keres hapnimi. What's the keres hachitzon? Is the keres hachitzon basar hachofes rova keres? It's the flesh on top. So according to Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina, the answer is very simple. If the flesh on top is the keres hachitzon, and the Mishnah says the keres hachitzon, if it's torn by its majority, it's a treifa, that means that tearing the flesh on top is enough. You don't have to remove it. So it's a raya. So the Gemara says, that's very nice according to Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina, but that's not Shmuel's opinion. Shmuel's opinion is that the keres hachitzon is not the basar on top. So he never addressed any of this. The Gemara says, "Midu time l'Shmuel." Hachi Amar Rav Yaakov Amar Chaninu Amar Shmuel Makom Shei Bo Milas. Shmuel said that the keres hachitzon is the part of the stomach that doesn't have hair lining it. So he had never addressed the basar on top of it, and he never indicated his opinion about whether it's torn or removed, and therefore we don't have an answer. Okay. Last sugya of the day. Whew. Okay. There was a type of treifa in the times of the Gemara. I will say this. I saw this years ago in Art Scroll. On the bottom, they quoted from the Mechtam Eliyahu that he theorized something. It doesn't. He acknowledges it doesn't really work. One of the treifas in the Gemara is called a drusa. A drusa means that a large animal claws at the animal. The perception was that if a lion were to claw a cow, it claws its neck, and it doesn't puncture anything. Merely clawing it, there's poison in the claws of the lion. There's venom that is now inflicted into the cow. Now, obviously, lions don't have venom in their claws. So I saw from the Mechtam Eliyahu, he said that maybe it was the bacteria on the nails of the lion. The problem is, as you're going to see in today's daf, the Gemara is going to point out, and this is why the Mechtam Eliyahu himself acknowledges it doesn't really work. The Gemara is going to point out that if an animal is sort of being attacked, it puts more venom in, as opposed to if it's just attacking an animal that's not attacking it back. So I obviously, if it's bacteria under the nails, I can't imagine it makes a distinction between efforts. It must be that there was some bacteria. Now, so what's the pshat? The answer is animals have changed over thousands of years. Okay, and the truth is, it's al chumash b'sina. It doesn't matter. If it claws an animal, it's a treifa. That's okay. There was a perception that there was poison. Whether there was or not is completely irrelevant. So anyway, that's what we're going to talk about for the next 5 minutes. Okay, Drusha Sazev. The Mishnah says that if an animal is clawed by a wolf, if the animal, the victim, is being clawed, min hazev l'mayla. If the animal is a big animal, it has to be clawed by a wolf or larger. Okay? Meaning you need wolf or larger, so you need wolf, lion, bear. But if you're dealing with birds that are clawing each other, min hanetz l'mayla. When it comes to birds, you need a nates. I think they say a nates is a hawk. It has to be a big bird to claw other birds. Okay, so Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav says, so think about what's happened over here. The Mishnah said a wolf. Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav says it has to be a wolf or larger. So Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav is basically repeating what the Mishnah said. The Mishnah said wolf. He said it also has to be a wolf or larger. Why is he saying this? So says the Gemara, Lemute Mai. Why is Rav reiterating what the Mishnah said? That he's reiterating that it's a wolf. So says the Gemara, maybe he's trying to clarify, a cat is not capable of making a drusa, meaning that if a small puma claws at you, at an animal, it does not make a drusa. Here's the problem, though. Don't I see that already from the Mishnah? The Mishnah said wolf or larger. Why did Rav have to say wolf? Okay, so l'miyutei chatul, I can figure that out from the Mishnah. Meaning, in other words, why did the Mishnah say wolf? If Rav said wolf to exclude a cat, why did the Mishnah say wolf? If it's also to exclude a cat, I don't need Rav to say this. So it says the Gemara, Tanino drusas azev. So why did the Mishnah say wolf? If Rav said wolf to exclude a cat, then why did the Mishnah say wolf? So it says the Gemara, okay, I'll tell you why. Maybe the Mishnah said wolf, Rav said wolf to exclude a cat. And why did the Mishnah say wolf? It's to tell you that a wolf is capable of making an animal that's a treifa, whether it's a small animal, a goat, or a large animal, an ox. So now it makes sense. Rav is saying wolf to exclude cat. The Mishnah is saying wolf to include that a wolf is capable of killing or maiming or poisoning even an ox. Here's the problem. That works out well. So Rav said wolf to exclude cat. Mishnah said wolf to include a wolf harming an ox. Here's the problem. So according to this, the Mishnah is saying wolf to include that a wolf can harm an ox. The problem is, but wait a minute, Hatanan, Rabbi Yehuda Omer Drusa Seiv Bedaka Brusas Ari Begasa. Rabbi Yehuda, the Tana, said not like that. Rabbi Yehuda said that a wolf is not capable of killing an ox. A wolf can harm a daka, so a sheep, a goat, a wolf can make a drusa, but he can't make a drusa of an ox. So think about what happened over here. Rav said wolf, the Mishnah said wolf. So he said Rav said wolf to exclude cat. Then why did the Mishnah say wolf? So he said, well, the Mishnah said wolf to include that a wolf can kill an ox. But it's not what Rabbi Yehuda said. So you'll say, okay, the Mishnah argues with Rabbi Yehuda. But the Gemara says, no, that can't be. But Rabbi Loi said, that Rabbi Yehuda is not arguing the Mishnah. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yehuda and the Mishnah agree with each other that a wolf is not capable of making an ox a drusa, so now it doesn't work. So the Gemara says, Gavra Karamis. So Rav doesn't agree with Rabbi Loi. Meaning, according to Rav, Rabbi Yehuda, the Tana, and our Mishnah disagree with each other. According to Rabbi Yehuda, a wolf is not capable of making an ox a drusa. According to the Tana Kama of our Mishnah, they are. And now it makes sense. Rav said wolf to exclude cat. Mishnah said wolf to include that a wolf is capable of harming an ox. Says the Gemara, or you know what the answer is like this. What was the original problem? Rav said wolf to exclude cat. But we said the Mishnah said wolf to exclude cat. What do I need both? The answer is, the reason why you need both is because as follows. If you didn't have Rav, I would say the Mishnah said wolf because it's the most common animal that scratches. What type of animal is going to attack an ox? Lions don't, they're not near farms. Wolves, more common. So maybe if I would read the Mishnah as just wolf is just the common application. Comes Rav and he says, no, wolf is to exclude cat, that a cat is not able to be dairis an animal. If a cat does it, there's not enough venom in the cat's claws to inflict this type of damage. The Gemara says, Iba Yisema, the truth is, Lo Ilum Yutei Chatul, Ma'ud Yisema Orcha Demilsa Katani Kamashmalan. Okay, so when I said before 5 minutes, I wasn't accurate. Now it's 4 minutes. We're almost done. Almost done. Okay, last sugya of the day. Let's do it. Amar of Amram, Amar of Chasida. Rav Chasida says as follows. It's 9:19. By 9:25, you'll all be in your beds, just chilling. So the Gemara says like this. Rav Chasida says as follows. Jusas chatul, if a cat claws, or nemia. Nemia also claws, it's a type of marten. A Brad marten. It's a type of weasel-like animal. Okay. Anyway, also a marten. Jusas chatul v'nemia. So a cat or a nemia is capable of trafing up a gedim and tloim, goats and sheep. Okay. Jusas chulda ba'ifis, and a weasel is capable of making a trefa of birds. So focus on this. According to Rav Chizda, a cat is able to make a drusa of sheep and goats. Okay. Here's the question. Meisvei, I have a kasha. There's a brisa. The brisa says, drusas chatul Neitz v'nemiyah at shetinake v'chalal. The Brisa clearly states that a chatul, a cat, a neitz, a hawk, v'nemiyah, or a martin, none of these animals are able to make a drusa. They'll only make a treifa if they puncture the lungs. But because if you puncture the lungs, anything's a treifa. It doesn't matter how you puncture the lungs. But drusa leslahu. So we have a problem. Rav Chizda said that a cat is able to make a drusa. The Brisa says a cat is not able to make a drusa. Straight up contradiction. Now, before we address Rav Chizda, we have another problem. The Brisa said that a hawk is not able to make a drusa. I thought a hawk is able to make a drusa. I thought that's part of the Mishnais. Says the Gemara, "B'tizbar neitz leidaris v'tanan udrusas haneitz holikasha kam ba'ovis kam megdim l'tlois." That's not a problem because they both could be right. A hawk is able to make a drusa of other birds. A hawk is not able to make a drusa of a sheep. So when the Mishnah said that a hawk is able to be a drusa, that's talking about other birds. When the Brisa said it's not, that's talking about sheep. But we have a problem with Rav Chizda. Okay? 2 more minutes. 3 more minutes. We have a problem with Rav Chizda. Rav Chizda said that if you have a cat that is doiris another sheep or a goat, it makes a drusa. But the Brisa says it doesn't. That's the problem. Does a cat make a drusa or not? So says the Gemara, I'm sorry. Mikomakum Rav Chizda kasha. So the Gemara says, Hu da Amar Kaitana. Rav Chizda follows the following opinion, which is Berebi. The Tanya Berebi Omer. Lo Omrun ein drusa al b'makom she'ein matzilin. Av makom she'ein matzilin yesh drusa. Comes Berebi and he says like this: the Rabbanon feel that a cat never makes a drusa. Comes Berebi and Berebi says it depends. If the cat is attacking, it doesn't make a drusa. But if the cat is attacking and you're trying to help the animal, so let's say the cat is going after a sheep. Says Berebi, the Rabbanon feel the sheep is not able to make a drusa at all. The cat is not going to make a drusa of the sheep at all. Comes Berebi and he says it depends. If the sheep is just the victim, it won't make a drusa because it's not going to inflict enough venom. But if it sees that Adam is trying to schlep the sheep away to help out the sheep, then the cat's like, oh, it's 2-on-1, and Adam's tall. So he goes after the sheep with more venom. He inflicts more venom in his claws. When Rav Chizda said that a cat is able to make a drusa, it's following Berebi, and it's talking about a case where you're trying to save the sheep. Says the Gemara, wait a minute. Makom shein matzilin in drusa, v'ahi tarnagoylis dehava be Rav Kahana, derod chatul basra, v'ol le'idra v'itchach dashav abe. This is actually funny. This is like a cartoon. Wasn't there once a cat that was chasing after a chicken, and then the chicken ran in the house and slammed the door in front of the cat, and the cat, like, it hit the door, hit the cat in the face. And he was all annoyed. And the Gemara says, "Umachie ladosha lebesachuvia," and the cat put its claws in the door. And they found 5 spots of poison in the door. So over there, no one was saving the chicken, and yet the cat inflicted enough poison to affect the door. So the Gemara says, no one was saving the chicken was saving itself. Meaning normally, for a cat to inflict poison, it needs to see that it's a big fight. Over there, it was just cat on chicken. But because the chicken closed the door on its face, it got enraged. That's the point. For a cat to be enraged, it either needs Adam to be there, or it needs a chicken throwing the door in its face. The Gemara says the Rabbanon and the Rabbanon who, according to this version, feel that a cat never inflicts poison. What about the fact that there are 5 poison marks in the door? So the Gemara says, Zira islay v'lei kol zir. There was enough poison to affect the door, but not enough poison to actually affect an animal. 3 more minutes. And then I mean it this time, though. I really mean it this time. This is the first version where the Rabbanon feel a cat never inflicts poison, and according to Rabbi, it inflicts enough poison if it's being attacked. Says the Gemara, Ikeda Amri, some have a different version. That Rabbi again still feels that a cat will only inflict enough poison if Adam's helping the sheep. But according to this version, the Rabbanon feel a cat always inflicts enough poison. So according to this version, the Rabbanon feel it always inflicts enough poison, and Berebi says no, only if it's being saved. The Gemara says, and according to this version, Rav Chizda, who said that a cat inflicts enough poison, follows the Rabbanon. The Tanya Berebi Omer le'omer yesh drus la'makom sheyesh matzilin. Makom sheyesh matzilin drusa, same back and forth. The Gemara says, makom sheyesh matzilin and drusa. V'ahi tarnagoylis to have Rav Kahana derod chatul basar. Wasn't there a chicken, and the cat is chasing the chicken? And it closed the door in front of it, and it swiped the door, and the Gemara same answers. The answer is again, one more, I just want to finish up. The Gemara says one more, the Gemara says again the same thing, which is that according to Rabbi, it needs to be enraged. It's normally enraged if someone helps the animal, or in this case, if the animal helps itself. just to finish up the discussion about the chicken and the weasels and the cats, the Gemara ends off. Boy min Rav Kana Merav. Rav Kana asked Rav, Yesh drus l'chatul, can a cat inflict enough poison to make a treifa? Or ein drus l'chatul, or not? So he said, Af l'chol yesh drusa. Not just a cat, a weasel also. So according to the first version, cat and weasel can make a treifa. Then they asked him, Yesh drus l'chatul, ein drus l'chatul. Does a weasel have enough poison to make a treifa? Amrle af l'chatul ein drusa. He says, neither a weasel or a cat. So the first time he answered, he said both a cat and weasel, yes. Now he's saying cat and weasel, no. And then they asked him the last time, what about a weasel and a cat? Cat, yes. Weasel, no. So in other words, Rav said three statements. One time he said cat and weasel, yes. One time he said cat and weasel, no. And then one he said cat, yes, weasel, no. How do you reconcile them? And the answer is very simple. When with this, it depends on what animal he was referring to. So says the Gemara like kasha. By birds, yes, check. Cat and weasel can make a bird treifa. Check for birds. When he said XX, neither, that's b'imiravi, that's an ox. Cat or weasel cannot do an ox. So birds, yes, ox, no. When he said a cat, yes, and a weasel, no, that was referring to goats and sheep. The Gemara says, okay, stop
So
there.
cats would be weasels can't.
Correct. Whew.